Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. 50th Anniversary Edition. Appendices. Appendix A. Annals of the Kings and Rulers. Concerning the sources for most of the matter contained in the following appendices, especially A to D, see the note at the end of the prologue. The section A3 Durin's folk was probably derived from Gimli the dwarf, who maintained his friendship with Peregrine and Meriadoc, and met them again many times in Gondor and Rohan. The legends, histories, and lore to be found in the sources are very presented. Are very extensive. Only selections from them, in most places much abridged, are here presented. Their principal purpose is to illustrate the War of the Ring and its origins, and to fill some of the gaps in the main story. The ancient legends of the First Age, in which Bilbo's chief interest lay, are very briefly referred to, since they concern the ancestry of Elrond and the Numenorian kings and chieftains. Actual extracts from longer annals and tales are placed within quotation marks. Insertions of later date are enclosed in brackets. Notes within quotation marks are found in the sources, others are editorial. The dates given are those of the Third Age, unless they are marked SA, Second Age, or FA, Fourth Age. The Third Age was held to have ended when the Three Rings passed away in September 3021, but for the purposes of records in Gondor, FA began on March 25th, 3021. On the equation of the dating of Gondor and the Shire reckoning, see Volume 1, page 4 and 3, page 1112. In lists of the dates following, the names of kings and rulers are the dates of their deaths. If only date is given, the sign cross indicates a premature death in battle or otherwise, through the annal of the event is not always included. 1. The Numenorian kings. I. Numenor. Fëanor was the greatest of the Eldar in arts and lore, but also the proudest and most self-willed. He wrought the three jewels, the Silmarili, and filled them with radiance of the two trees, Telperion and Laurelin, that gave light to the land of Valar. The jewels were coveted by Morgoth, the enemy, who stole them, and, after destroying the trees, took them to Middle-earth. And guarded them in his great fortress of 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃. Against the will of the Valar, Fëanor forsook the blessed realm, and went in exile to Middle-earth, leading with him a great part of his people. For in his pride he purposed to recover the jewels from Morgoth by force. Thereafter followed the hopeless war of the Eldar and the Edain against 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃, in which they were at last utterly defeated. The Edain, Atani, were three peoples of men, who, coming first to the west of Middle-earth and to the shores of the great sea, became allies of the Eldar against the enemy. There were three unions of the Eldar and the Edain, Luthien and Beren, Idril and Tuar, Arwen and Aragorn. By the last, the long sundered branches of the half-elven were reunited, and their line was restored. Lúthien Tinúil was the daughter of King Thingol Greycloak of Doriath in the First Age, but her mother was Melian of the people of the Valar. Beren was the son of Barahir of the first house of the Edain. Together they wrested a Silmaril from the iron crown of Morgoth. Lúthien became mortal and was lost to elvenkind. Dior was her son. Elwing was his daughter and had in her keeping the Silmaril. Idril Celebrimbor was the daughter of Turgon, king of the hidden city of Gondolin. Tuor was the son of Huor, of the house of Hador, the third house of the Edain, and the most renowned in the wars with Morgoth. Erendil and the Mariner was their son. Erendil wedded Elwing, and the power of the Silmaril passed the shadows, and came to the uttermost west, and speaking as an ambassador of both elves and men, obtained the help by which Morgoth was overthrown. Erendil was not permitted to return to mortal lands, and a ship bearing the Silmaril was set to sail in the heavens as a star, and a sign of hope to the dwellers in Middle-earth, oppressed by the great enemy or his servants. The Silmarilli alone preserved the ancient light of the two trees of Valinor, before Morgoth poisoned them, but the other two were lost at the end of the First Age. Of these things the full tale and much else concerning elves and men is told in the Silmarillion. The sons of Erendil were Elros and Elrond, the Peredil, or half-elven. In them alone the line of the heroic chieftains of the Edain in the First Age was preserved, and after the fall of Gil-galad, the lineage of the High Elven kings was also in Middle-earth only represented by their descendants. At the end of the First Age the Valar gave to the half-elven an irrevocable choice to which kindred they would belong. Elrond chose to be of elvenkind, and became a master of wisdom. To him, therefore, was granted the same grace as to those of the high elves that still lingered in Middle-earth, that when weary at last of the mortal lands, they could take the ship from the grey havens and pass into the uttermost west, and his grace continued after the change of the world. But to the children of Elrond a choice was also appointed, to pass with him from the circles of the world, or if they so remain, to become mortal and die in Middle-earth. For Elrond, therefore, all chances of the War of the Ring were fraught with sorrow. Elros chose to be of mankind and remained with the Edain, but a great lifespan was granted to him, many times that of lesser men. As a reward for their sufferings in the cause against Morgoth, the Valar, the guardians of the world, granted to the Edain a land to dwell in, removed from the dangers of Middle-earth. Most of them, therefore, set sail over the sea, and guided by the star of Erendil, came to the great isle of Elena, westernmost of all mortal lands. There they founded the realm of Numenor. There was a tall mountain in the midst of the land, the Meneltarma, and from its summit the far-sighted could descry the white tower of the haven of the Eldar in Eressa. Thence the Eldar came to the Edain, enriched them with knowledge and many gifts, but one command had been laid upon the Númenóreans, the ban of the Valar. They were forbidden to sail west out of sight of their own shores, or to attempt to set foot on the Undying Lands, for though a long span of life had been granted to them, in the beginning thrice that of lesser men, they must remain mortal, since the Valar were not permitted to take from them the gift of men, or the doom of men, as it was afterwards called. Elros was the first king of Numenor, and afterwards known by the high elven name Tar Miniatur. His descendants were long-lived but mortal. Later, when they became powerful, they begrudged the choice of their forefather, desiring the immortality within the life of the world that was the fate of the Eldar, and murmuring against the ban. In this way began their rebellion, under which the evil teaching of Sauron brought the downfall of Numenor and the ruin of the ancient world, as told in 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃𝓃. These are the names of the kings and queens of Numenor: Elros, Tar Miniator, Vardamir, Tar Amandil, Tar Elendil, Tar Meneldor, Tar Aldarion, Tar Ancalim, the first ruling queen, Tar Anarion, Tar Surion, Tar Telperion, Tar Ancalimon, Tar Telemente, Tar Vanimelde, the third queen, Tar Alcarin, Tar Calamakil, Tar Ardamin. After Ardamin, the kings took the scepter in names of the Numenorian, or Adunaic tongue: Adunacor, Zimrathon, Sacalthor, Gimilzor, Inzalduin, Inziladun. Inzaladun represented the ways of the kings and changed his name to Tar Palantir, the Farsighted. His daughter should have been the fourth queen, Tar Miriel, but the king's nephew usurped the scepter and became Pharazôn the Golden, the last king of the Númenóreans. In the days of Tar Elendil, the first ships of the Númenóreans came back to Middle-earth. His elder child was a daughter, Silmarion. Her son was Valandil, the first of the lords of Anduine, in the west of the land, renowned for their friendship with the Eldar. From him we were descended Amandil, the last lord, and his son Elendil the Tall. The sixth king left only one child, a daughter. She became first queen, for it was then made a law of the royal house that the eldest child of the king, whether man or woman, should receive the scepter. The realm of Numenor endured to the end of the Second Age, and increased ever in power and splendor, and until the age had passed, the Númenóreans grew in wisdom and joy. The first sign of the shadow that was to fall upon them appeared in the days of Tar Minastir, 11th king. It was that sent a great force to the aid of Gil-galad. He loved the Eldar, but envied them. The Númenóreans had now become great mariners, exploring all the seas eastward, and they began to yearn for the west and the forbidden waters, and the more joyful was their life, the more they began to long for the immortality of the Eldar. Moreover, after Minastir, the kings became greedy of wealth and power. At first the Númenóreans had come to Middle-earth as teachers and friends of lesser men, afflicted by Sauron, but now their havens became fortresses, holding wide coastlands in subjection. Atanamir and his successors levied heavy tribute, and the ships of the Númenóreans returned laden with spoil. It was Tar Atanamir who first spoke openly against the ban and declared that the life of the Eldar was his by right. Thus the shadow deepened, and the thought of death darkened the hearts of the people, and then the Númenóreans became divided. On the one hand were the kings and who followed them, and were estranged from the Eldar and the Valar. On the other were the few who called themselves the Faithful. They lived mostly in the west of the land. The kings and their followers, little by little, abandoned the use of the Eldarin tongues, and at last the 20th king took his royal name in Númenórean form, calling himself 𝒦𝒾𝓃ℊ𝒹𝓂, Lord of the West. This seemed ill-omened to the faithful, for hitherto they had only given that title only to one of the Valar, or to the Eldar king himself, and indeed Eragion began to persecute the faithful and punished those who used the elven tongues openly. The Eldar no more came to Númenor. The power and wealth of the Númenóreans nevertheless continued to increase, but their years lessened as fear of death grew and their joy departed. 𝒦𝒃𝓃ℊ𝒹𝓂 attempted to amend the evil, but it was too late, and there was rebellion and strife in Númenor. When he died, his nephew, leader of the rebellion, seized the scepter and became King 𝒦𝒃𝓃℧𝒹. 𝒦𝒃𝓃℧𝒹 the Golden was the proudest and most powerful of all the kings, and no less than the kingship of the world was his desire. He resolved to challenge Sauron the Great for supremacy in Middle-earth, and at length himself set sail with a great navy, and he landed at Umbar. So great was the might and splendor of the Númenóreans that Sauron's own servants deserted him, and Sauron humbled himself, doing homage and craving pardon. Then 𝒦𝒃𝓃℧𝒹, in the folly of his pride, carried him back as a prisoner to Númenor. It was not long before he had bewitched the king and was master of his council, and soon he had turned the heart of all the Númenóreans, except the remnant of the faithful, back towards the darkness. And Sauron lied to the king, declaring that everlasting life would be his who possessed the undying lands, and that the ban was imposed only to prevent the kings of men from surpassing the Valar. But great kings take what is their right, he said. At length �𝒃𝓃℧𝒹 listened to this counsel, for he felt the waning of his days and was besotted by the fear of death. He prepared then the greatest armament that the world had seen, and when all was ready he sounded his trumpets and set sail, and he broke the ban of the Valar, going with war to wrest everlasting life from the lords of the West. But when �𝒃𝓃℧𝒹 set foot upon the shores of Aman the Blessed, the Valar laid down their guardianship and called upon the One, and the world was changed. Númenor was thrown down and swallowed in the sea, and the undying lands were removed forever from the circles of the world. So ended the glory of Númenor. The last leaders of the faithful, Elendil and his sons, escaped from the downfall with 9 ships, bearing a seedling of Nimloth and the 7 seeing stones, gifts of the Eldar to their house. And they were borne on the wind of a great storm and cast upon the shores of Middle-earth. There they established in the northwest the Númenórean realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor. Elendil was the High King, and dwelt in the north at Annúminas, and the rule in the south was committed to his sons, Isildur and Anarion. They founded there Osgiliath, between Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, not far from the confines of Mordor. For this good, at least, they believed had come out of ruin, that Sauron had perished. But it was not so. Sauron was indeed caught in the wreck of Númenor, so that the bodily form in which he long had walked perished, but he fled back to Middle-earth, a spirit of hatred borne upon a dark wind. He was unable ever again to assume a form that seemed fair to men, but became black and hideous, and his power thereafter was through terror alone. He re-entered Mordor, and hid there for a time in silence, but his anger was great. When he learned that Elendil, whom he most hated, had escaped him, and was now ordering a realm upon his borders. Therefore, after a time he made war upon the exiles, before they should take root. Orodrin burst forth more into flame, and was named anew in Gondor. Amon Amarth, Mount Doom. But Sauron struck too soon, before his own power was rebuilt, whereas the power of Gil-galad had increased in his absence. And in the last alliance that was made against him, Sauron was overthrown, and the One Ring was taken from him. So ended the Second Age. The Realms 2. The Realms in Exile. The Northern Line, heirs of Isildur. Arnor, Elendil, S.A. 3441. Isildur. Hmm. 3442. Valandil, 2. No, just do it like this. Valandil, 249. Eldakar, 339. Arantar, 435. Tarsil, 515. Terondir, 602. Valundur, 652. Elundur, 777. Erandur, 861. Arthedain, 𝒦𝒾𝓃ℊ𝒹ℴ𝓂, elder son of Erandur, 946. Beleg, 1029. Malot, 1110. Celefarin, 1191. Celebrimbor, 12,072. Malvagil, 13,049. Rather, 1,349. Argalab, 1,356. Arvalag the First, 1,409. Arafor, 1,589. Argalab the Second, 1,670. Arvagil, 1,743. Arvalag the Second, 1,813. Araval, 1,891. Araphant, 1,964. Arvidi, Last King, 1,975. End of the Northern Kingdom. Chieftains. Aranarth, elder son of Arvidi, 2,106. Arahel, 2,177. Aranor, 2,247. Aravir, 2,319. Aragorn the First, premature death, 2,327. Araglas, 2,455. Arahad the First, 2,523. Aragost, 2,588. Aravorn, 2,654. Arahad the Second, 2,719. Arasul, 2,784. Arathorn the First, premature death, 2,848. Arguini, 2,912. Arador, premature death, 2,930. Arathorn the Second, premature death, 2,933. Aragorn the Second, F.A. 120. King the Southern Line, heirs of Anarion, kings of Gondor. Elendil, Isildur, and Anarion. Premature death, Essay, 3,440. Meneldil, son of Anarion, 158. Commendor, 238. Erendil, 324. Anardil, 411. Ostoher, 492. Romendasil the First, Harostar, premature death, 541. Turambar, 667. Atanar the First, 748. Sirondil, 830. Here followed the 4 ship kings. Taranon Falastor, 913. He was the first childless king and was succeeded by the son of his brother Tarsirion. Ernil the First, premature death, 936. Siriandil, premature death, 1015. Hyarmendasil the First, Syriahair, 1149. Gondor now reached the height of its power. Atanatar the Second, Alcarin the Glorious, 1226. Narmasil the First, 1294. He was the second childless king to be succeeded by his younger brother. Kalmasil, 1304. Min Alcar, regent, 1240 to 1304. Crowned as Romendasil II, 1304, died 1366, Valakar 1432. It is this time the first disaster of Gondor began, the kinstrife. Eldacar, son of Valakar, at first called Vinathria, deposed 1437. Castamir the usurper, premature death 1447. Eldacar restored, died 1490. Aldemar, second son of Eldacar, died prematurely 1540. Hyarmendasil the Second, Viniarion, 1621. Minardil, premature death 1634. Telanmar, premature death 1636. Telanmar and all his children perished in the plague. He was succeeded by his nephew, son of Minanstin, second son of Minardil. Tarondir, 1798. Tel-Lumatar Umbardasil, 1850. Narmasil II, premature death 1856. Kalametar, 1936. Undahar, premature death 1944. Undahar and his 2 sons were slain in battle. After a year, in 1945, the crown was given to the victorious general Ernil, a descendant of Tel-Lumatar. Oh dear Lord. Bardasil, Ernil II, 2043. Ernir, premature death 2050. Here the line of kings came to an end until it was restored by Elisar Telcontar in 1319. The realm was then ruled by stewards. Stewards of Gondor, the House of Hurin, Pilundir, 1998. He ruled for a year after the fall of Undahur and advised Gondor to reject Arvidui's claim to the crown. Vorondil the Hunter, 2429. Mondil Voronwe the Steadfast, the first of the ruling stewards. His successors ceased to use High Elven names. Ruling stewards: Mardil 2080, Eridan 2116, Heron 2148, Belagorn 2204, Hurin the First 2244, Turin the First 2278, Hadar 2395, Bahir 2412, Dior 2435, Denethor the First 2477, Boromir 2489, Sirion 2567, and this time the Rohirrim came to Kelanardon. Halas 2605, Hurin the Second 2628, Belactor the First 2655, Oradeth 2685, Ector Leon the First, 2698. 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃, 2743. Baron, 2763. Eragion, 2811. 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃 the second, 2872. Throndir, 2882. Turin the second, 2914. Turgon, 2953. 𝒦𝒾𝓃𝓃 II, 2984. Denethor II, he was the last of the ruling stewards, and was followed by his second son Faramir, Lord of the Arnor, steward to the King of Elsar. FA 82. 3. Eriador, Arnor, and the heirs of Isildur. Eriador was the old name of the lands between the Misty Mountains and the Blue in the south, and it was bound by the Grey Flood and the Glanduin that flows into it above Tharbad. At its greatest, Arnor included all of Eriador except the regions beyond the Loom, and the lands east of the Grey Flood and the Loud Water, in which lay Rivendell and Hollin. Beyond the Loon was elvish country, green and quiet, where no men went, but dwarves dwelt, and still dwell in the east side of the Blue Mountains, especially those parts south of the Gulf of Loon, where they have mines that are still in use. For this reason they were accustomed to pass east along the Great Road, as they have done for long years before they came to the Shire. And in the Grey Havens dwelt Círdan the shipwright, and some say he dwells there still until the last ship sails into the west. In the days of the kings, most of the high elves that still lingered in Middle-earth dwelt with Círdan, or in the seaward lands of Lindon. If now any remains, they are a few. The North Kingdom and the Dunedain. After Elendil and Isildur, there were 8 high kings of Arnor. After Eärendil, owing to dissensions among his sons, their realm was divided into 3: Arthedain, Rhuidear, and Cardolan. Arthedain was in the northwest, and included the land between the Brandywine and Loon, and also the land north. Of the Great Road as far as the Weather Hills, Rhuidear was in the northeast, and lay between the Ettamores and the Weather Hills and the Misty Mountains, but included also the angle between Horwell and the Loudwater. Cardolan was in the south, its bounds being Brandywine, the Grey Flood, and the Great Road. In Arthedain the line of Isildur was maintained and endured, but the line soon perished in Cardolan and Rhuidear. There was often strife between the kingdoms, which hastened the waning of the Dunedain. The chief matter of the debate was the possession of the Weather Hills, and the land westward towards Bree. Both Rhuidear and Cardolan desired to possess Amonsul, Weathertop, which stood on the borders of their realms, for the tower of Amonsul held the chief Palantir of the north, and the other 2 were both in the keeping of Arthedain. It was in the beginning of the reign of Malvegil of Arthedain that evil came to Arnor. For that time in the realm of Angmar rose in the north beyond the Enten Moors. Its land lay on both sides of the mountains, and there were gathered many evil men and orcs and other fell creatures. The lord of that land was known as the Witch King, but it was not known until later that he was indeed the chief of the Ringwraiths, who came north with the purpose of destroying the Dunedain in Arnor, and seeing in their disunion while Gondor was strong. In the days of Argaleb, son of Malvegil, since no descendants of Isildur remained in other kingdoms, the kings of Arthedain again claimed the lordship of all Arnor. The claim was resisted by Rhuidear. There the Dunedain were few, and power had been seized by an evil lord of the Hillmen, who was in secret league with Angmar. Argaleb therefore fortified the Weather Hills, but he was slain in the battle of Rhuidear and Angmar. Arvaleg, son of Argaleb, with the help of Cardolan and Lindon, drove back his enemies from the hills, and for many years Arthedain and Cardolan held in force a frontier against the Weather Hills, the Great Road, and the Lower Horwell. It is said that at this time Rivendell was besieged. A great host came out of Angmar in 1409, and crossed the river, entered Cardolan, and surrounded Weathertop. The Dunedain were defeated and Arvaleg slain. The tower of Amonsul was burned and razed, but the Palantir was saved and carried back in retreat to Fornost. Ruadar was occupied by evil men subject to Angmar, and the Dunedain remained there, were slain or fled west. Cardolan was ravished. Arafor, son of Arvaleg, was not yet full grown, but he was valiant, and with the aid of Círdan he repelled the enemy from Fornost and the North Downs. A remnant of the faithful among the Dunedain of Cardolan also held out in Tirn Gorthad, the Barrow Downs, or took refuge in the forest behind. It is said that Angmar was for a time subdued by the elven folk coming from Lindon, and from Rivendell, for Elrond brought help over the mountains out of Lorien. It was at this time that the Stores that had dwelt in the angle between Horwell and Loudwater fled west and south because of the wars and the dread of Angmar, and because the land and clime of Eriador, especially in the east, worsened and become unfriendly, and clime some returned to Wilderland and dwelt beside the Gladden, becoming a riverside people of fishers. In the days of Argaleb II, the plague came to Eriador from the southeast, and most of the people of Cardolan perished, especially in Menehriath. The hobbits and all other people suffered greatly, but the plague lessened as it passed northwards, and the northern parts of Arthedain were little affected. It was at this time that an end came to the Dunedain of Cardolan, and evil spirits out of Angmar and Ruadar entered into the deserted mounds and dwelt there. It is said the mounds of Tirn Gorthad, as the Bower Downs were called of old, were very ancient, and many were built in the days of the old world of the first age by the forefathers of the Edain, before they crossed the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, of which Lindon is all that now remains. Those hills were therefore revered by the Dunedain after their return, and there many of their lords and kings were buried. Some say that the mound in which the ring-bearer was imprisoned had been the grave of the last prince of Cardolan, who fell in the war of 1409. In 1974, the power of Angmar rose again. The Witch King came down upon Arthedain before winter was ended. He captured Fornost and drove most of the remaining Dunedain over the Lune. Among them were the sons of the king, but King Arvedui held out upon the North Downs until the last, and then fled north with some of his guard, and they escaped by swiftness of their horses. For a while Arvedui hid in the mountains of the old dwarf mines near the far end of the mountains, but he was driven at last by hunger to seek the help of Lossoth, the snowman of Forokel. Some of these he found in the camp by the seashore, but they did not help the king willingly, for he had nothing to offer them, save a few jewels which they did not value, and they were afraid of the Witch King, who, they said, could make frost or thaw at his will. But partly out of pity for the gaunt king and his men, and partly for fear of their weapons, they gave them a little food, and built for them snow huts. There Arvedui was forced to wait, hoping for help from the south, for his horses had perished. When Círdan heard from Arneth, son of 𝒦𝒃𝓃, of the king's flight to the north, he at once sent a ship to 𝒦𝒃𝓃 to seek for him. The ship came. Footnote: these are a strange, unfriendly people, remnants of the Foradwaith, men of far-off days, accustomed to the bitter colds of the realm of Morgoth. Indeed, these colds linger still in that region, though they lie hardly more than 100 leagues north of the Shire. The Lossoth house in the snow, and it is said that they can run on the ice with bones on their feet, and have carts without wheels. They live mostly inaccessible to their enemies on the great cape of 𝒦𝒃𝓃 that shuts off the northwest to the immense bay of that name, but they often camp on the south shores of the bay at the feet of the mountains. There at last, after many days, because of contrary winds, and the mariners saw from afar the little fire of driftwood which the lost men contrived to keep alight. But the winter was long and loosening its grip that year, and though it was then March, the ice was only beginning to break, and lay far out from the shore. When the snowmen saw the ship, they were amazed and afraid, for they had seen no such ship on the sea within their memories. But they had become now more friendly, and they drew the king and those that survived of his company out over the ice in their sliding carts as far as they dared. In this way a boat from the ship was able to reach them. But the snowmen were uneasy, for they said they smelled danger in the wind. And the chief of the Lossoth said to 𝒦𝒃𝓃, "Do not mount on this sea monster. If they have them, let the seamen bring us food and other things that we need, and you may stay here still till the rich king goes home. For in the summer his power wanes, but now his breath is deadly, and his cold arm is long." But 𝒦𝒃𝓃 did not take counsel. He thanked him, and at parting gave him his ring, saying, "This is a thing worth beyond your reckoning, for its ancientry alone. It has no power save the esteem in which those hold it who love my house. It will not help you, but if ever you are in need, my kin will ransom it with great store of all that you desire." Yet the counsel of the Lossoth was good, by chance or by foresight, for the ship had not reached the open sea when a great storm of wind arose, and came with blinding snow out of the north. It drove the ship back upon the ice, and piled ice up against it. Even the mariners of Círdan were helpless, and in the night the ice crushed the hull, and the ship foundered. So perished 𝒦𝒃𝓃, last king, and with him the Palantiri were buried in the sea. It was long afterwards that news of the shipwreck of 𝒦𝒃𝓃 was learned from the snowmen. The Shire folk survived. The war swept over them, and most of them fled into hiding. To the help of the king they sent some archers who never returned, and others went also to the battle in which Angmar was overthrown, of which more is said in the annals of the south. Afterwards, the peace that followed, the Shire folk ruled themselves and prospered. They chose a thane to take the place of the king, and were content, though for a long time many still looked for the return of the king. But at last that hope was forgotten, and remained only in the saying, "When the king comes back, used of some good that could not be achieved, or of some evil that could not be amended." The first Shire Thane was one 𝒦𝒃𝓃 of the Marsh, from whom the old Bucks claimed descent. He became Thane in 379 of our reckoning, 1979. Footnotes. In this way the ring of the house of Isildur was saved, for it was after ransomed by the Dunedain. It is said that it is none other than the ring which Felagund of Nargothrond gave to Barahir, and Beren recovered at a great peril. 2. These were the stones of Anunimus and Amonsul. The only stone left in the north was the one in the tower on Imin Brered that looks towards the Gulf of Lune, that was guarded by the elves, and though we never knew it remained there until Círdan put it aboard Elrond's ship when he left. When he was told that it was unlike the others and not in accord with them, it looked only to the sea. Elendil set it there, so that he could look back with straight sight and see Aresa in the vanished west, but the bent seas below covered Numenor forever. After Arvedui, the North Kingdom ended, for the Dunedain were now few, and all the peoples of Eredor diminished. Yet the line of kings was continued by the chieftain of the Dunedain, of whom Aranarth Yet the line of the kings was continued by the chieftains of the Dunedain, of whom Aranarth, son of Arvedui, was the first. Arahael, his son, was fostered in Rivendell, and so were all the sons of the chieftains after him. And there also were kept the heirlooms of the house, the ring of Barahir, the shards of Narsil, the star of Elendil, and the scepter of Anumenius. 1. The scepter was Footnote 1. The scepter was the chief mark of royalty in Numenor. The king tells us that was also so in Arnor, whose king wore no crown but bore a single white gem, the Elendil. The star of Elendil, bound on their brows with a silver fillet. In speaking of a crown, Bilbo no doubt referred to Gondor. He seemed to have become well acquainted with matters concerning Aragorn's line. The scepter of Numenor is said to have perished with Ar-Pharazôn. That of Anúminas was the silver rod of the lords of the Anduin, and now perhaps the most ancient work of men's hands preserved in Middle-earth. It was already more than 5,000 years old when Elrond surrendered it to Aragorn. The crown of Gondor was derived from the form of a Númenórean war helm. In the beginning it was indeed a plain helm, and it is said to have been the one that Isildur wore in the battle of Dagorlad, for the helm of Eragion was crushed by the stone cast from Barad-dûr that slew him. But in the days of Atanatar, Alcarin, this was replaced by the jewelled helm that was used in the crowning of Aragorn. When the kingdom ended, the Dunedain passed into the shadows and became a secret and wandering people, and their deeds and labours were seldom sung or recorded. Little now is remembered of them since Elrond departed, although even before the watchful peace ended, evil things again began to attack Eriador or to invade it secretly. The chieftains, for most part, lived out their long lives. Aragorn the First, it is said, was slain by wolves, which ever after remained a peril in Eriador, and are not yet ended. In the days of Arahad the First, the orcs, who had, as later appeared, long been secretly occupying strongholds in the misty mountains, so as to bar all of the passes into Eriador, suddenly revealed themselves. In 2509, the Celebrian, wife of Elrond, was journeying to Lorien when she was waylaid in the Redhorn Pass, and her escort being scattered by the sudden assault of the orcs, she was seized and carried off. She was pursued and rescued by Aladdin and Elrohir, but not before she had suffered torment and had received a poisoned wound. She was brought back to Imladris, and though healed in body by Elrond, lost all delight in Middle-earth, and the next year went to the havens and passed over sea. And later, in the days of Arasul, orcs multiplying again in the misty mountains began to ravage the lands, and the Dunedain and the sons of Elrond fought with them. It was at this time that a large band came to the far west as to enter the Shire, and were driven off by Bandobras Took. There were 15 chieftains before the 16 and last was born. Aragorn II, who became king of both Gondor and Arnor. Our king we call him, and when he comes north to his house in Annúminas, restored, and stays for a while by Lake Evendim, then everyone in the Shire is glad, but he does not enter this land that binds him by the law that he has made, that none of the big people shall pass its borders, but he rides often with many fair people to the great bridge, and there he welcomes his friends and any others who wish to see him, and some ride away with him and stay in his house as long as they have mind. Thane Peregrine has been there many times, and so has Master Samwise, the mayor. His daughter Elenor the Fair is one of the maids of Queen Evenstar. It was the pride and wonder of the northern line, that through their power departed and their people, that though their power departed and their people dwindled, through all the many generations the succession was unbroken from father to son. Also, though the length of the lives of the Dunedain grew ever less in Middle-earth, after the ending of the kings the waning was swifter in Gondor, and many of the chieftains of the north still lived to twice the age of men, and far beyond the days of even the oldest among us. Aragorn indeed lived to be 210 years old, longer than any of his line since King Arvegil, but in Aragorn Elisar the dignity of the kings of old was renewed.